Hello, bruvs. We're back with So the Witch Won't Eat Me. Fantasy and the Child's Fear of Infanticide by Dorothy Bloch. We are getting close to finishing this book. Slowly inching our way. I believe this is this is Channel 13. Chapter 12, The Persistence of Childhood. Fantasies in an Adult. The Persistence of Childhood Fantasies in an Adult. Page 222. Sandra's choice of glass also appears to have other ramifications. On a number of occasions, when I tried to put her in touch with the rage that was keeping her immobilized, she stated that she felt like smashing glass. The particular glass that immediately came to mind was the storefront of her parents' candy store in Chicago. Let me grab this to aid my wrist in not aching. Her parents' candy store in Chicago, but that was as far as her associations went. We therefore have to speculate that the temptation to vent her considerable rage at her parents as a child assumed the form of wishing to shatter their store window and was then repressed. Yeah. The ease with which such a deed could have been accomplished reminds us of a similar challenge her father presented and suggests the degree of control she must have exercised in order to restrain herself. It is therefore possible that whenever she later felt a similarly overwhelming impulse, she unconsciously summoned up that earlier image that had demanded so much control and so kept the world safe by placing it behind glass walls. As her feelings of rage were exposed and understood in relation to their cause, her right to such feelings and her ability to tolerate them began to be established. At the same time, her need to maintain relationships that inspired so much rage diminished so that the amount of rage with which she had to deal also decreased. The first symptom to go was the glass walls sensation. This was accompanied by a less and less frequent need to go out of contact, and by a briefer duration of such periods. Finally, after about 2.5 years, Sandra ruefully stated that she was no longer able to accomplish this feat at all. At most, when her rage overwhelmed her, she felt distant and remote. As in the case of Norma, simultaneous with Sandra's need to maintain her worth in order to conceal the murderous feelings evoked by her parents was the equal necessity of proving her worthlessness in order to justify her perception of her parents' hatred and of their concealed wish to destroy her. In order to create this worthless image, she had originally explained her father's violence by conceiving of herself as a mean, nasty, ill-tempered child. She also insisted she never did anything right, and in reality she felt that she should always be doing something else, although it wasn't clear just what that should be. Although she expressed her thoughts with precision, she was convinced that she made little sense. Her extraordinarily accurate perceptions of other people were rejected as distortions at the slightest challenge, with the ready admission that this was merely additional evidence that something was wrong with her. She also avoided any opportunity that might establish her true worth. One time, at a friend's suggestion, she wrote an article. When an editor immediately offered to print it, all further writing stopped. The intensity of her need to maintain a devalued image of herself and the magnitude of the stake that was involved were dramatically revealed on several occasions. At one point, when I was truly astounded by her tale of how she had managed to secure a college degree despite her terror, I commented on her unusual effectiveness. For weeks after that, she lived in a state of panic that warned me of the caution I had to exercise in exposing her system of self-deception and in challenging her fantasy of a devalued identity. When she emerged, we both agreed that effectiveness was a dirty word, to be avoided at all costs. As her fears diminished and she was able to permit herself to be effective, however, an incident occurred that threw into perspective all her previous revelations. She worked at a daycare center with a group of very difficult children, whom her intuitive approach permitted her to handle with great skill, although any questioning repeatedly persuaded her that she had found the only possible way of dealing with them. She remained convinced of her inadequacy. One child, for instance, defied all her efforts. When I suggested that perhaps he didn't belong in a daycare center, she readily agreed that of course she knew that, but she had assumed that since he had been placed in her group, she should have been able to find a way of handling him. When she referred him to the director, who, after consultation, agreed that she was right and recommended hospitalization, she experienced a profound sense of shock. The suggestion that she was right, in which not only he, but all the other teachers concurred, plunged her into a state of despair. If she was right, then what she had perceived about her parents was true. The unexpressed hope that her perceptions had always been wrong, that her parents hadn't really wanted to kill her, but that her own worthlessness had produced this image, and that at some unspecified time, perhaps when she was no longer worthless, the image would change and they would show her the love and the care for which she had waited. All of this could no longer be maintained. There was still another ramification to her investment in denying her perceptions, however. The concept that she should have been able to find a way led directly back to her father and her conviction that it was her ineffectiveness that prevented her from finding a way to make him love her. She assumed complete responsibility for his catatonic withdrawals and reasoned that he would not go away if he loved her. Since she could not prevent his withdrawing, in order to join him, she engaged in the very serious practice of inducing herself to withdraw, but never succeeded in producing more than a bad headache. Had she been effective, she was convinced she would have discovered a way of either joining her father or of keeping him here. To admit effectiveness, therefore, meant to admit defeat, and to surrender all hope of dealing with her father's withdrawal so that he might love her. Not until another incident occurred some months later, however, did Sandra's insight into the handling of her perceptions finally liberate her repressed knowledge of her father, freeing her from the world of fantasy in which she had dwelt all her life and from the need to distort her own identity. For some years she had maintained a friendship with an extremely disturbed young man whose need to be taken care of was only too familiar. She experienced any prolonged exposure to his presence as oppressive and traced the feelings of guilt that he instilled back to her own early experience with her father. As with her father, her friend's interest in creating a world of fantasy provided the more enjoyable moments of the relationship. As Sandra became healthier, however, she found his company increasingly intolerable and saw him less and less. One day he introduced her to a male friend with whom he was planning to live. During the session at which she reported this meeting, Sandra presented her impressions of her friend's relationship very vividly, but without giving it a name. When she met him after an interval of 2 months, she found him very upset about the impending rupture of the relationship, which he openly described as homosexual. To her amazement, Sandra realized that only after her friend had admitted it could she acknowledge her clear perception of the nature of his relationship. Although she had known it from the very first moment, she had not permitted herself to know what she knew. Sandra's realization that she devoted a great part of her energy to concealing what she knew enabled her to recognize its origin and her repression of her knowledge that her father was crazy and had wanted to kill her, which she could now freely admit. This new awareness was accompanied by a strangely unfamiliar sensation of relaxation. All the tension that had kept her body in a constant state of motion was gone. She also found herself freed of the necessity to watch people. Knowing what she knew apparently also meant seeing what she saw. She became conscious of what she called background, that is, her true orientation in space. She saw objects instead of stumbling over them. The lack of coordination that had previously accompanied her movements appeared to be gone. Her ability to experience on a deep level the awareness that her father was crazy and had wanted to kill her had at last defined the real source of danger and removed it from the world. The fantasy of another unreal dimension no longer appeared necessary. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. Although Sandra's stake in maintaining both her worth and her worthlessness was presented in the same muffled way all her feelings were, it nevertheless became clear very early in her treatment just what that investment was. Her experiences with both parents had left her at the age of 25 with only one conscious wish, to be what she called a ball. On an unconscious level, however, she also tried to structure her relationship with her mother in order to create the illusion of being taken care of, the closest she could come to feeling loved. At the beginning of her analysis, I began to suspect some hidden meaning in her method of paying me. Although she herself was paid once a month, she dutifully handed me my fee at the end of each session. When I explored it, I discovered that she was repeating with me a strange ritual that she had forced her mother to perform. She gave her mother all her earnings, but insisted that each morning her mother dole out to her just enough for lunch and subway fare. That the motivating force underlying all of Sandra's defenses was the conviction that survival rested on the hope of somebody. Jesus Christ. That the motivating force underlying all of Sandra's defenses was the conviction that survival rested on the hope of someday winning her parents' love was demonstrated not only by her investment in establishing both her worth and her worthlessness, but by the disaster that threatened when this system of self-deception appeared to fail. As in the case of Norma, whenever either her worth or her worthlessness was in danger of being proven beyond any doubt, her wish for death came to the fore, just as all her other feelings were carefully understated and masked by such terms as gray or edgy or bland or drifting or numb, and never identified as anger or despair or depression or terror. Her suicidal wishes were equally camouflaged. At various times, when her rage became overwhelming and threatened to expose her image of her worth and to reveal her murderous feelings towards her parents, she expressed a wish to fade into the couch, or to go through walls, or float, or disappear. Similarly, late in her analysis, when her first real wish to do work, oh man, look, to do work that interested her, endangered her image of worthlessness, and with it the repressed knowledge of her parents' murderous feelings. She spoke of her desire to lie at the bottom of a pool. As she was able to admit into awareness both her own and her parents' feelings, her symptoms disappeared. At a point in Sandra's treatment, when her major symptoms had subsided or vanished altogether, I began to suspect that more than terror was involved in the periodic and persistent reappearance of the black chiffon things. And in Sandra's sensing her father's presence, it became apparent that they represented not only fear but profound longing. I recalled her initial presentation of her father as a sweet and helpless, but it wasn't until she began to discuss a relationship she was having with a man that I understood the nature and the depth of her involvement with her father. She had selected a man who, she stated unequivocally, she could not have tolerated for a moment if she had had any real fear that he would kill her. She recognized, nevertheless, that his suppressed violence and his silence were sufficient reminders of her father to enable her to recreate the illusion of her presence. She also experienced his frequent absences from the city, and she had her father's withdrawals as death and his anticipated returns as a continual revival of the hope that her father would come back. It took another, more gratifying relationship, however, to clarify her persistent attachment to a father who filled her with terror, although she realized sadly that whenever she tried to summon a fond memory of him, within minutes it was transformed into something unpleasant and menacing. The mystery was not cleared up until one day when her father's image suddenly appeared in the midst of her lovemaking and filled her with rage. She then recalled the sexual excitement she had experienced as a child while lying in bed with her father on one of the many afternoons when they took a nap together. Nothing she had experienced since had recaptured the marvelous sense she had at that moment of wonderful things about to happen, of transcending reality. Her indignation at his intrusion into her current life and his interference with her pleasure finally dissolved her attachment and her need to revive her image of him. She also was then free to seek mature relationships. As the cases of Norma and Janet demonstrated, there appears to be a direct relationship between the intensity of the destructiveness of the parental environment and the scale of the fantasies required as a defense. Whereas Norma was able to create a system of self-deception that remained within the framework of reality, Sandra, like Janet, found it necessary to develop defenses that appeared to enable her to transcend it. In her case, the intensity of her parents' violent feelings and the occurrences of actual incidents that could have caused death produced a state of terror of such magnitude that apparently only the symptoms of schizophrenia could accommodate it. She created an imaginary world onto which she projected the danger that her father represented and endowed structures with the threat of smothering that she feared from her mother. In order to escape attack, she adopted the illusion that she was shadowy or invisible and continually held herself in a state of readiness, either by training her body to remain on the alert or by keeping in motion to avoid being a target. She designed not only her activities but all her relationships to escape what she experienced as the imminent and ever-present danger. She further defended herself by going out of contact or developing the sensation that she was surrounded by glass walls whenever she felt overwhelmed by her rage. She thus not only enhanced her sense of safety by concealing from herself the precipitating cause of her anger, and so avoiding identifying her parents as the source, but she also protected them from the possible consequences. That her early childhood terror had remained undiminished is traceable both to its early intensity and to the concept of death that she had formed in response to her father's catatonia. Since she had always thought of him as dead when he was withdrawn, his actual death did not remove him as a source of terror. Similarly, her mother's agitated state, which from Sandra's description sounded like psychosis, persisted until some time after Sandra had entered treatment. Sandra therefore continued to require the same defensive fantasies as an adult that she had needed as a small child. As she was able to admit that she had needed, as she was able to admit into awareness both her own and her parents' feelings, and her re-experiencing of them permitted her to separate the past from the present. The fantasies that had defended her against both her fear of being killed by her parents and of killing them in return were resolved. I mean, what's this shit that the sexual thing while she was lying with her father? What kind of weird shit is this? And that she just glosses over all this. She then recalled the sexual excitement she had experienced as a child while lying in bed with her father on one of the many afternoons when they took a nap together. I mean, she just glosses over that. I mean, what the fuck is that? Or is that just like normal? I mean, it's just weird. I don't know. What's that mean? All right, maybe I'm the weird one. She acts like nothing was wrong with it. And everything's just attributed to them wanting to kill each other. I don't understand. Don't. All right, that's all. Goodbye.